Welcome to day 2 of the 2025 Glenn Space Technology Symposium. Most of you, I think, were here yesterday, and if you weren't, you've probably been to one of these, so I'm going to run through some kind of logistical things real quick before we get into our first session. So just want to say a big thank you again to all of our sponsors. Raytheon, our gold sponsor, thank you so much for everything. L3 Harris, thank you. Rolls-Royce and Voyager, our bronze sponsors, thank you to all of you. Our reception sponsor last night was Blue Origin, it was great. Our brake sponsor is Leidos. Our lanyards are obviously BWX Technologies, and a tremendous supporter of this event is the Aerospace Corporation. Thanks to our collaborators, NASA, everybody at NASA Glenn, and our excellent, fantastic hosts here at Case Western Reserve University. We really appreciate everything you do. And if you weren't familiar, we're doing this in September this year as part of Ohio Space Week. So we have the Ohio Space Forum on Thursday. We run Monday through Wednesday. Ohio Space Forum's on Thursday. There's NASA Glenn's Evening with the Stars Wednesday night. It's a space-oriented baseball game at the Guardians on Thursday night, an astronaut throwing out the first pitch. I think it's Suni Williams. And then they're doing the opening up a new exhibit at the Great Lakes Science Center, the NASA Glenn Visitors Center there on Friday and Saturday. So really good week. Thank you very, very much to our planning committee, our chairs, Steve Witkowski from Moog, and our chair from Glenn, Marty Schaefer, and then everybody listed there. Thank you to everything you've all done for putting this whole thing together. We really appreciate it. Okay, so as our panel comes on up, just real quick on Q&A. Again, if you aren't familiar, microphones in the room, please don't be bashful, step up. That's what our panels are here for, to answer any questions you might have. Please make it a question, not a statement, and if you have to take a breath, that's enough, all right? Okay, so also don't forget social media. If you're having a good time, you take some good pictures, you meet some good people, please let everybody in your audience know on your favorite social media outlet. We appreciate that kind of word of mouth marketing. All right, so let's get into it. This first panel is about the changing space industry. What it was yesterday is not what it is this morning. We all know that this is a really sporty, dynamic time, and so we've assembled a group of folks here to talk a little bit about that, to see kind of where we are now and what might be expected, and maybe prognosticate a little bit, look into their magic 8 ball and see what's coming. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amber McIntyre. She's Senior Director for Civil Space at the Aerospace Industries Association, and she's our moderator for today. Amber.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to AAS for pulling this wonderful event together. I want to welcome everybody back to day 2 of the Glenn Space Tech Symposium. As Jim mentioned, I'm Amber McIntyre. I have the privilege of representing the Aerospace Industries Association. We are one of the oldest and largest aerospace and defense trade associations in the country. We represent about 300 companies, and about 60 of those are a part of the space supply chain. So we every day work with industry. We have the privilege of being the voice for industry, whether it's on the Hill with the executive branch or with some of our colleagues who are represented here today. We also convene the space associations across the country every month. So we're in really good touch, and we're often a coalition for advocacy. So as Jim mentioned, today's conversation is really about the changing space industry, and I can't think of 3 better people to be a part of this panel who are really at the tip of the spear at all the dynamic changes that are happening, understanding all the opportunities and the challenges. So instead of introducing them, I thought we would maybe have them do a bit of self-introductions, and to answer our very first question, not burying the lead here, 6 months into this new administration, what do you guys see as the most pressing and urgent challenges and also opportunities facing the space enterprise? And let's start with Mr. Alan Cutler.
All right. Well, thank you for having me today. I appreciate it, and this is a much better audience than what I had last week. So I'll give you that much. No, it was Pleasure to be invited. Thank you for having me here. Alan Cutler, Coalition for Deep Space Exploration. We're a industry organization, obviously involved a lot with the Artemis program. We have suppliers up and down the supply chain, going from valves, nuts, you name it, all the way up to big integrators in the supply chain, all the way through for the Artemis program. And obviously those suppliers don't just do that, they also work throughout the space industry. So I think that's an easy thing for me to advocate for, given my previous life. But I love that 6 months into the administration. Here we are. I think in terms of opportunities and challenges, and as I'll just look at, because I deal with civilian space for the most part, that I think it all stems from the top at some point. NASA, from a challenge, NASA needs an administrator. We've got Secretary Duffy's there in the interim role. But in order for the civilian space program to be moving forward, there needs to be someone there up top that's not divided in their attention. There needs to be that leadership to provide some continuity, direction within the agency. Now, it's great. Don't get me wrong. Amit being placed in the elevated is a great step in a good direction, I think, for NASA, particularly on the exploration side. But yes, you can't. There's nothing that sets a tone better than having a leader up top. So I think, because of that, there's a lot of uncertainty. And I was making a note. It was like uncertainty abounds. There's a lot of questions out there. There's a lot of conflict, a lot of mixed messages coming across what's happening across the entire portfolio. And I think as you have direction from up top, there can be some continuity, and that provides a stable environment for everybody to be able to have some predictability and make your plans.
All right. Thank you, Amber, and thank you, Alan. So I'm Ron Burke. In addition to my role with the American Astronautical Society, as introduced yesterday, serving very humbly and appreciatively serving as the president of the board for the society. My day job is with the Aerospace Corporation, which is a FFRDC for our nation that is celebrating its 65th birthday. So it's been around as long as I have, which is a nice thing to relate to. Within the Aerospace Corporation, I serve as a principal director for a directorate called Space Enterprise Evolution, and the focus that we have in this directorate is dealing with and addressing the areas of space that do indeed look very different through the windshield than they do through the rearview mirror. And there are a number of these areas, as we related the slate of 8 here for AAS yesterday, that include, for instance, cislunar and cislunar ecosystems, in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, nuclear power and propulsion, and then technologies and technological approaches like digital engineering and AI. So there are many different ways that the space enterprise is evolving, and that we're seeing space ecosystems evolve. And we're addressing those and preparing the tools, techniques, and procedures to be able to support all of the community across the space enterprise to be able to deal with those changes. In terms of the question, right, 6 months into the administration, one of the heavy focus areas of this administration has been on leveraging commercial. We've seen from the first administration, first Trump administration, the national space policy take a very heavy emphasis on commercial, which continued that emphasis from the prior space policy. Whereas the prior space policy only mentioned commercial like 20 times, in the more recent, the current space policy mentions it 89 times. You know, if they just would have gotten one more, just one more, we might have been able to get a sense of where they were going. But there is a line in the space policy that requires all government agencies that are dealing with space to, I'll paraphrase, use commercial first. Right? I think the quote is, to use commercial to the maximum extent practicable under law. And it's notable that recently one of the many EOs that came out was numbered 14271, extended that policy to all government agencies, right, to use commercial first. So, something for us to be considering as members of the space enterprise is in an environment where there are reported to be 12,000 space companies now in the world, and some 5,000 in the US, right? There are a very large number of players in the game at this point. And for those companies to be developing whatever it is that they're developing to be deployed into space and operate in space is a thing, is a wonderful thing, and there are many exciting areas of focus. And just mentioned a couple of those. We're tracking over 80 companies that are building capabilities to be deployed into a cislunar ecosystem, for instance. But coming around back to the administration, as the government buys commercial, one of the challenges for consideration is recognizing that by its very nature, commercial systems have to evolve. And they have to evolve at the pace of need and demand from the market. So that's going to challenge the government to be able to adjust its management, its systems engineering and integration approaches for dealing with capabilities that are being assimilated from the commercial sector into national missions to accommodate that sort of dynamic evolution along the way.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And SIA represents the commercial satellite industry in the United States, and our members are comprised of satellite operators, manufacturers, launch companies, and ground equipment providers. So we certainly see a number of challenges and opportunities, referencing some of the challenges. Of course, the uncertainty that is taking place within Washington is one of the biggest ones. And some of it relates to personnel, some of it relates to offices. And so we still don't know whether there's going to be a National Space Council. And Chirag, maybe you could give us some insight into that. The Office of Space Commerce still does not have a head. And so, that ends up driving some of the policies within the administration. Within some of those policies that are impactful, the unknown impact of tariffs is one that's having a major impact on our members, just not knowing what costs are going to be. And the TRACS program that many of you may be familiar with, whether it's being funded or not. And that's been back and forth. It's been an interesting policy challenge because we don't even know who is behind the effort to defund TRACS. And I just heard as of yesterday that OMB may be seeking to pull the funding for it. So, that is such an important program to the industry, certainly to the satellite industry, given the tremendous growth in the number of satellites that are on space. Not knowing how we're going to keep track of them is very, very important. There are some opportunities at the same time, and so SIA has been involved in making sure that we have access to spectrum for the industry, and even some nuts and bolts issues like the licensing. And we've seen some great progress there. The FCC has rulemakings pending to provide more spectrum than the entire industry has available today. And that's a tremendous opportunity for the industry, given that it's the lifeblood of our members' operations. The same thing is true with respect to licensing. And fortunately, the importance of the industry has been recognized. The chairwoman of the FCC created the Space Bureau a couple of years ago. That has really helped address some of the resource issues. And the commission has been moving forward dealing with some of the backlog and licensing. But interestingly enough, that's one of the issues that I hear more about from our members than anything else, just the length of time that it has taken to get licenses, because that is a key to their operation. One of the other things that I'll note is that many of our members share spectrum with the government, and the coordination between NTIA and the FCC continues to take longer than our members would like. We were able to pull together a roundtable discussion. They're very open to new ideas and how this can be done better. But I think that that's an example of one of the opportunities, just changing the way business is done. So those are some of the, I'll say, major challenges. There are certainly many, but from a regulatory perspective and administration perspective, those are some of the challenges and opportunities that we see.
Awesome. Thanks, all of you guys. So talking about the uncertainty and the clarity from leadership, where the money goes is a very clear indication of what an administration or what leaders care about. And in this particular scenario that we find ourselves in, we continue to see bipartisan support from the Hill. We have saw a reconciliation bill that pluses NASA up for $10 billion for exploration. And yet we're not quite sure what's going to happen on the executive side, given rumors about impounding funds and conversations that I think folks at OMB are having about their intent at these agencies. Curious for you, Alan, particularly, what budget scenarios do you see potentially playing out, and sort of what hot takes do you have on that front?
Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Oh my goodness. So, well, I guess, let's see. You wake up this morning and you see there's about 22 days or so left in the fiscal year, but in reality it's a little shorter because Congress is only going to be in session for, I think, 9 days between now and October 1st. That's not a lot of time, and so here we are in a very compressed schedule. So let's look at where people are. We have a White House and some fiscal conservatives that want to see a extended CR going through January, and in some cases a full year. Obviously that would be of benefit to the administration, and that they're using a lack of direction from the Congress to be able to come in and really kind of adjust how money is spent the way they would like. You have the appropriators, so you've got Chairman Cole on the House side and Chairwoman Collins. They want to see a shorter term CR. They would like to see something maybe November, December timeframe, and that having a shorter deadline is for a continuing resolution is a effort to keep Congress's feet to the fire. Let's get some motion. Let's try and get some compromise done, and do it quickly. If you punt the deadline into next year, Congress runs on deadlines and what's the crisis in front of us. If you let things slide, they will fill up the time with things. Also allows for the good idea fairy to show up and come up with all kinds of new and entertaining leverage points. And then we have the minority. With the 60 votes that you need in the Senate to pass any bill, for a continuing resolution to pass, you need to have some buy-in from Democrats. So what is it that they want to be able to do this? What's emerging at the moment, at least as of this morning and yesterday, is the extending the credits for the Affordable Care Act. That seems to be something that's being coalesced around as far as here's the price of admission if you want to get Democrat support for any type of CR. And it gets you to thinking that's the easy part, right? And so then you come in and you have the administration coming in and doing rescissions, and that sets a bad puts a bad taste in the mouth of a lot of members, both Republicans and Democrats. You have a situation where Congress has determined this is what we're going to do, here's how we're going to spend the money, what we're going to spend it on, all that sort of thing. And now the administration comes in on the backside and says, well, we're going to take some of that money back. How do you negotiate when you think that the other side is not negotiating necessarily, it's not negotiating in bad faith, but our agreement's still there? Because we agreed on this, you get the votes, move on, government's funded, and then on the backside, we're just going to come back and take money back. I mean, that's a difficult situation to try and convince someone, especially when you need their votes, to vote for a bill. So that's the near term. That's this month. Yeah, it's not, but it's interesting because, we budget 1 year at a time in this country. We do annual funding bills, and that makes it difficult. It's a start-stop process. We've all lived through this. How many times have we done the CR dance? We'd like to see that happen. On the flip side, on the authorization bill, and with the hearing that we had last week, or with Chairman Cruz and Ranking Member Cantwell, one of the things that would help provide some stability in this process is having a multi-year authorization, a bill that can sit there and lay out, here are the priorities that we can all agree on, that Congress agrees on, the president signs into law, here we are, this is the direction we're going, and set that path. Right now we have a lot of differing opinions. Where does Congress fit on all this? You have a House and Senate appropriations bills with NASA funded at about $24.8 billion, which is roughly flat to where we are. That is significantly different from $18.8 billion that the administration asked for. You have reconciliation that included funding for Artemis 4 and 5, Mars mission, facilities. These are all things that are somewhat contrary to what the president's budget put out there. And so now you see Congress is very focused on what they would like to do, and it's not necessarily lined up with where the administration is. So but I mean, Congress is in one place, the administration seems to be in another. We need to get some kind of resolution, and hopefully somewhere along the line with the funding battles that are going to happen, we'll get some.
Thanks, Alan. Curious to know how you guys have seen industry respond and how trade associations and space associations are responding to this. So maybe Tom, how are your members sort of addressing this? What are you guys working on to try to handle some of this?
Yeah, for the most part, it's starting by engaging and trying to provide our perspective. I would note that I've been with SIA for just over 10 years, and when I started at SIA, I found that we really needed to help educate policymakers on the importance of the industry, and I think that we're beyond that. I think there's a great understanding now, so it's making sure that they understand the impact of some of these policies. And the best way is to provide education and engagement, and we have a report, the State of the Satellite Industry report, that provides financial data. That is one of the means that we use to do that. But I think that that's probably one of the most important things. Many of the policies that we advocate and issues we're addressing are long-term. I mean, I talked about some of the things like licensing. I mean, these are ongoing discussions that take place over a course of years, and sometimes it's one step at a time in terms of improvements. But for the most part, what we're seeking to do is just make sure that there's an understanding, policymakers have an understanding, and that our members are apprised of what the issues are. But for the first time in my career at SIA, I saw one of our issues become politicized. And for the most part, our issues have been nonpartisan. But I don't know if many of you are familiar with the BEAD funding program. It was designed to be able to provide broadband service to underserved areas. And the new administration decided that it was not being implemented in a technology-neutral manner. That some of the technologies, such as satellite, were not being given proper consideration. And there were members of Congress that saw this as just a means of funding one company, and it happened to be headed by a person who was very unpopular in some quarters in Washington at the time, given the DOGE program. And so we needed to provide an education that there's more than one company that provide broadband service, and the revisions have been made to be determined how all of the states are going to deal with that. But certainly provided an opportunity for us, but also a risk, because there was I'll say potentially damaging comments, damaging to the industry as a whole, just in terms of some of the misperceptions about the capabilities of satellite relative to other services. So again, what we're trying to do is to provide engagement and education as much as possible.
Yeah, we're doing similar work at AIA as well. You mentioned licensing, and Ron, you mentioned the EOs. I'm curious to know sort of how you guys are seeing sort of the near-term benefits or impacts to industry, particularly with the EO enabling commercial space competition, looking at Part 450, elevating the Office of Space Commerce, looking at mission authorization. Do you see those as openings for industry? How do you see those sort of being helpful or harmful for industry at this point?
Yeah, they certainly have the potential, and I think the purpose of being beneficial to industry and to the commercial sector. The challenge is in the implementation, right? So it's great that the intent is documented, but the resources are not necessarily there, right? So just picking up on the points that were just raised. To Alan's point, the budget for NASA in FY26 could range anywhere from 18.6 to, if you did an amortized version of the reconciliation bill, 28, right? So I mean, that's a $10 billion delta just in that sort of relatively simple model. How much funding is going to be available and how that's going to be applied is still very much uncertain at this point.
And speaking of implementation, Alan, I know there's been conversations about like the strategic implications of NASA going from, fixed price contracts to Space Act agreements. Do you think that's ultimately beneficial for industry?
Well, I think we've had a couple of things. Ron touched on it a little bit. The commercial first thought process is absolutely something that is there, and I think what you see in that, and what you see as the shift is where is risk? Where's risk held? And if you look at it from if it's a commercial, we can use that term. I think what we have are government-led missions versus government-led missions sort of things, and then it's something that's industry-led. Who's the one who's taking the first step out there? Who's taking that risk? So if you've got a government-led program, you're subject to political whims. That's just the joys of being government. They tend to be a little more conservative on the technologies, just because if the government's putting the money in, they don't want failure, and that's that learning curve tends to be a little. Well, they may not necessarily want to go if it's being led by government. Now, if industry comes in and government says, all right, we're going to do this, we're going to do the service, we're going to buy these things, all right, there's a less accountability that's involved, less oversight from NASA that can lower costs, but you also are increasing your possibilities that something may not work out. We had 2 spacesuit suppliers for going to the moon and for the space station, and one of them suspended their activities. There's nothing really NASA can do about it. I mean, that is a certain absolute risk. So if government's involved and government leads, they do have the kind of the push or say, this is a priority. We are going to do this regardless of what happens, and they move out. So I think, pick your contracting mechanism, but you certainly do have the challenge of how mature is what you're applying this contract mechanism to. Easy to do a commercial model if it's just buying stuff on and off, but I don't think anybody's going to build a Webb telescope on their own. I mean, it was inherently governmental, and those things happen. There's a balance that needs to be struck here. You can't do one or the other. You just got to find what system works best for whatever mission you're working on.
Ron, I want to have you pick up on that and talking a little bit more about these evolving ecosystems and what it means to strike that right balance between commercial investment and government partnerships.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the key challenges, one of the key differences between sort of our legacy experience with the government, with the majority of space-based systems being government-acquired bespoke, one of my favorite words. You don't get to use that every day, right? Bespoke systems, right, that are purchased under FAR Part 12, is that you have an entity that has a leadership responsibility for the entirety of whatever they're acquiring. Okay, for better or for worse, there is at least the benefit that you have a single and defined governance structure, okay, in that instance. In the instance where you shift, and I do believe we as an enterprise are passing through this portal, right? A shift from that legacy of a finite number of bespoke systems to a future of increasingly seeing the government leverage systems capabilities out of the commercial ecosystem, is you no longer have a top-level governance structure, right? You no longer have anyone who is defining, for instance, I love the panel yesterday on power, right? Who's defining the specifications, the standards for power interfaces, right? Our colleague from L3 Harris was talking about using a 28-volt approach. That's great, but that was their decision. Where's the governance structure that helps to define that? And then, you know, it's just kind of try to crystallize those points, but now extrapolate that to the larger context of the multiple layers of infrastructure that are required for sustainable operations in space. You've got power, you've got communications, you've got navigation, you've got transportation, and we can continue on. There's on the order of 12 fundamental levels of infrastructure. Where is it in our enterprise that the communities that have to come to agreement on things like those interface standards do so? Where did they do that? We're fortunate to see some initial activity. You know, the AIAA has a systems ecosystem task force. That's helpful. Okay, it's helpful. There's a community that's come together that is working on digital twin and industrial metaverse. Don't you love buzzwordy words like that, right? So when I first heard it, I really thought it was a buzzword, and then I looked into it. Turns out adjacent industries have been doing industrial metaverse approaches to address this problem for over 2 decades. They use digital environments to work out the interfaces across multiple organizations that have to interface together for a solution set. And so there's precedent. There's an answer to your question, but we're just beginning, are we even beginning to see this come into the space enterprise? I think it's something to be considered, it's something to be fostered, but somehow there has to be a way for the many companies and government organizations to come to an agreement on what they will do that has to be done in order to deliver a national level mission capability.
And speaking of national mission level capabilities, I'm sure everyone at this table has heard about the multi-layer missile defense system that our Department of War is working on. Curious just to know about what you guys are thinking in terms of, you know, how are we going to ensure regulatory alignment, interagency cooperation to help sort of see this vision through, and what do you think will be NASA's role in this effort? Maybe we start with Tom and work our way back.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go back to the balance issue first, because as I noted, we represent the commercial satellite industry, and so as a result, many of our members will be beneficiaries of an increased move towards utilization of commercial resources. And one of the advantages that the industry provides, the commercial industry provides, is rapid innovation, the ability to move more quickly. But certainly they are not going to build satellites to the needs of every government use. I mean, they're not going to be nuclear hardened, as an example. And most of them are dual use. That creates opportunities and creates issues. But I referenced our State of the Satellite Industry report, and it's very interesting to see just in terms of the numbers of satellites and the value of satellites that are being manufactured. And the majority of the value of manufactured satellites continues to be for bespoke, exquisite government satellites. And there is a need. One of our members has the ability to be able to provide imagery that is refreshed multiple times a day, but it is not necessarily going to provide the same kind of imagery that is necessary for the Defense Department for some of their applications, as an example. So it really is a matter of finding the right balance. And again, I think that there are some certainly communications applications that the government, and especially I'm going to go with the old Defense Department, their needs can be accommodated by the commercial sector. So we deal less with NASA, and I'll let our other panelists address that question.
All right. So I'll pick up from there and have us think a little bit about just how significant the Space Force's I'll say involvement in the enterprise is at this point, right? So, they're born, 5-6 years ago at about 15 billion. They're at 25 or 29 billion this year. I think 25. But on a trajectory of growth that is actually exceeding NASA. So valuable for us as an enterprise to think about these major U.S. players in space and think about where are the common areas between them, right? So where are there opportunities for joint use activity? Clearly transportation is a common area. Communications and navigation have common elements that can be distinctions, in terms of protected comms and so forth. But there are areas of common imaging, right, which may be used for multiple different purposes that are all common. So, and then foundational areas that are necessary for sustainable operations: cybersecurity, space-based cybersecurity, trusted microelectronics, right? So, in a distinct set of areas, there are foundational benefits from a national perspective to have common engineering and capabilities developed and proven for confidence for being deployed, all the way through that life cycle, that can happen across agencies, and tremendous value for those things that are dual use, that do not require classification schemes and do not involve weaponization, for there to be a common level of effort that is applied across multiple agencies.
Well, just to jump in on this, I think as you look at the whole role of government versus industry and those things, I think there's a point where it needs to be defined who is responsible for what. And I think that is where you start at. Is like, and once you get that defined, then you can start like going through, well, what are the regulations that we need, and do we take them? Do we need to modify them? Do we need to make changes? And one of the things, as I'm looking at Chirag here, I'm thinking, the Space Council. That is something, while there are plenty of interagency meetings that happen across the space world, that having the Space Council being chaired by the Vice President elevates space to a different level than just interagency meetings. It gives it the impetus of this is coming from the White House, and this is the direction we want to have things going, and we're going to reach out across the entire enterprise and do that from a government perspective. And once you have that direction, all right, let's go. Now let's just look at, I'll just fall back to what we work with with Artemis. All right, you have government running most of the show in terms of when you're launching SLS and Orion. That is NASA. They're doing that sort of thing. Then you go over to the lander side, and you have FAA involved, and that helps, is driving some schedule to some extent. When they've got to go in and do a review, it takes time. Things happen. NASA's want to be chugging away, but they are not solely in charge of their fate anymore. How do you get these pieces to play nicely with each other, and so that it works? And that's where you need that kind of overarching piece within government to help that happen. I think that's something that's there. And I do, going back to the testimony from last week, Lieutenant General Shaw was talking about China and how they have a grand plan about how they're going to return to the moon. Well, that is something that we ought to be looking at as well as from a government across the spectrum of the activities in space. What is our grand plan? How do we implement it across defense, civilian space, and make that happen? And that's where you can certainly get some top cover and some push if you have additional oomph provided by the Office of the Vice President.
Well, I think now might be a good time to see if there are any questions from our participants. Feel free to come up to one of the standing mics scattered over the room. But in the meantime, want to pull the thread on dual use real quick. How are you, Alan, thinking about dual use capabilities and the cooperation between NASA and DoD at the moment?
Well, I think I'm just thinking we've got industry represented up here across the board. I think from a stability standpoint, dual use, just our companies alone are all involved in both civilian and defense activities. I mean, it's in some cases they're the same people, sometimes supplying the same parts across both areas. I think that from the dual use, you never know when a good idea is going to show up. There may be something that is being worked on for a NASA mission that they develop a material, a process, whatever. Oh, sorry, I got my mic up a little higher. But as far as you just never know when that good idea, where that good idea is going to come from, and if it's because of a NASA-related research and development for a mission, great. Does it mean it has to stay there? No. These companies are very agile. They will take whatever advantage they have and apply it across the board. Same thing with defense. Things that happen over on the defense side can also benefit. So I think from dual use, we should be looking at making our investments wherever the ideas are, and as we do that, those opportunities of where they can be applied will be there.
Yeah, I'll pick up a particular drum here and hit a few beats. But this area of having a common engineering environment, right? So I appreciate all of the discussion we could have on dual use for particular technologies, even particular capabilities. But one of the things that we should consider is the value of having a common engineering environment and using, for instance, digital engineering. I've already hit on this industrial metaverse concept, so like I said, I'll drum a few more strums. But it really is a value proposition if the companies that are developing these technologies and solutions are using engineering environments that can be shared across a system of systems, certainly like Artemis. There's a real value proposition even within a particular system of systems, but across the civil and defense community as well. And one of the things that it allows is for regulation can actually be tested in a digital environment and determine just where it's beneficial and where it's not. Different configurations of capabilities can be evaluated as well. so that there's a possibility of being able to actually move a bit further, a bit faster, than every entity developing their capability in their silo and then putting it out into the wild and seeing how it does with the rest of the community.
Yeah, for many of our members, dual use is really commercial and defense related. And I would say that most companies, if they originally do not plan to provide dual use services, eventually will. It is just too big a market to ignore. Many times the commercial sector takes longer to develop. Some of the remote sensing applications are a good example where companies have been able to pivot to utilization of their technology for the Defense Department. And of course, most of the communication systems ultimately have applications across both. And there's a tremendous opportunity for companies, and also there's a risk associated with it because when it's identified that a satellite or satellite system is being used for military purposes, it then becomes a potential target for adversaries. But for the most part, it is something that almost all of our members take advantage of.
Excellent. Want to make sure we don't have any questions from our participants. I have plenty. Oh, my old boss, Chirag Parikh, former executive.
Former resident of Cleveland,
Of Virginia.
Ohio. Happened to be in DC for the past few hours. Thank you guys very much for coming out here. I think it means a lot to the region for being able to provide the national presence. I think Cleveland has a huge role. Glenn has a huge role in the partnerships across civil, commercial, and of course defense as well as Wright Pat down in Dayton. The question is even more expansive, Amber, and I'll focus on you, but I'd like to get a perspective from each of you guys, which is what we're doing here, particularly in the past 6 months, is not only having an effect on our commercial and defense ecosystems along the way, and of course civil. It's having an effect on our international partnerships, civil space agencies, defense enterprises across the Far East as well as Europe, as well as, of course, the commercial ecosystems there. And it's just like your guys' perspectives of where you see international is going, or anything that you might be doing particularly with international that might have a tie-in over here. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Chirag. No, it's a really good question. I'm happy to respond to this one and hand it over to the panelists. But, the U.S. leadership in space really means a lot for the international community. And when we step back and we don't have clear leadership, that void is felt. I was in Japan recently, and our typical counterparts are still unsure about who they can even talk to about ongoing partnerships, whether it's on the DoD front or on the commercial front. The civil space relationships seem to be really intact because NASA continues to sort of nurture those relationships, but there is a lot of worry in the international community about the future of not just NASA, but about the future of our civil space enterprise particularly. I do think industry has a unique role in being able to sort of work around some of the things that are happening with the government. So I was a part of a commercial delegation to Tokyo where we brought some of our members to meet with Japanese companies and to kind of do their own sort of brokering of relationships and partnerships to reemphasize that industry at least is not stepping back from its goals and its interest in sort of making sure that the U.S. leads. But whether it's sort of with industry partnerships or even sort of the role that we take in multilateral forum, whether it's at the UN or places like ICAO, where we have traditionally been the leading voice for things like sustainability and standards, without that leadership from the White House or from the administration, our international partners are concerned. But, the thing about things like the Artemis Accords is that we have been able to develop a real coalition of like-minded countries that care about sort of the future of space, care about bringing the non-spacefaring world into the fold. And so I still see a lot of hope and a lot of value in those conversations. But industry is really concerned. Things like tariffs make it even more challenging to understand where new opportunities are. When we step back from things like science, it does create a question for companies in terms of where new partnerships can flourish. I was just telling some of our panelists, we were at JAXA, and one of the heads of JAXA said, hey, if you have NASA scientists and engineers that want to move to Japan, we're happy to take them. And, you know, I'm not comfortable making those recommendations because I want our brain power to stay here. I want our best and brightest to have jobs and opportunities here in the States. So we're working with our companies on some of those things, but absolutely, Chirag, you know that they're looking for leadership from the U.S. They have relied on our leadership, especially around things like safety and sustainability. And so as we seem to be stepping back from some of those goals, we can see others maybe step up. We can also see maybe other countries or a coalition of countries like the EU, for example, take more dramatic measures to sort of fill that gap. I know folks might be tracking the EU Space Act, which, you know, does not necessarily look great for U.S. competition in the EU markets, but that's a reaction, right? And that's a response to what we're doing here. So I think folks should just continue to be mindful of what's happening, but companies should continue to absolutely build partnerships overseas, you know, make sure that their capabilities are available to the world because they need them, and, you know, continue to lead because, again, whether it's Japan and whether it's JAXA, ESA, or whether it's countries in Latin America and Africa, they have and continue to look to the U.S. for leadership. They continue to look at NASA's plans as an indicator to where they should invest. They continue to look at American companies and the capabilities and products that we're developing and how they can be partners with our members. So a lot of buzz and a lot of energy still on the international stage for space, but a lot of concern and a lot of lack of clarity on, particularly at the highest levels, who the interlocutors are. So I got to put in another plug for Space Council because it really was a one-stop shop for leaders around the world in terms of helping navigate our space enterprise here in the U.S.
I'll be quick. If you're going to do the partnership thing, it's like you need to be a reliable partner, and that is hands down. I mean, you've got 56 members on the Artemis Accords. If you want to be seen as the leader, you need to show up, and you need to lead. If not, other countries are going to see that unreliability as something that they have limited resources, just like everyone else. And if they're going to move forward, they are going to find a partner that's going to help them accomplish their goals. And if it's not us, it will be someone else.
Yeah. And, you know, taking into consideration, right, that from an international perspective, global affinity is a coin of the realm. We have, by virtue of all of the accomplishments that have happened in the United States in space, built a tremendous amount of appreciation for what the U.S. can do, and that has provided and essentially contributed to a global affinity towards the U.S. that has been very beneficial in any number of other areas of international statesmanship under the sort of rubric of soft power. So the more that we can continue to do in those domains, the better, and the clearer our plans are for what we're going to do, the more clearly the U.S. commercial sector can align their energy and interests to accomplish those objectives, and the more clearly and cleanly the international community can do so as well.
Yeah, let me add an example of how important this is. And approximately every 4 years, we have a radio conference. World Radio Conference is meeting in 2027. And over 85% of the issues are space-related. This is the first time I think that has ever happened. But we are dependent upon partners to be able to accomplish some of the objectives once we've established what our positions are going to be. And certainly the satellite industry by nature is global. Making sure that we have harmonization to be able to operate across borders is extremely important. But it's not limited to the satellite industry by any means. And how well we have engaged with our partners is going to have a direct impact on the outcome of some of the decisions to be made.
We're almost at time, and I do have a final question, but want to make sure. Excellent.
Hi there. Sorry. Thank you guys all for speaking. My name is Amos Langsner. I'm a mechanical engineering student here at Case Western. Just one question I had off of Alan, what you were talking about with the different types of contracts the government can give private companies and ensuring that there are like a sufficient number of vendors to maintain certain programs. One issue that, at least in my opinion, maybe hasn't gotten enough innovation or private attention is the potential hazards of space debris. And so I was just wondering, for the panelists, what your thoughts are on the hazards posed by space debris as more and more private companies start launching satellites, like especially into Earth orbit, low Earth orbit, and what you see as the best solution to mitigate that problem.
Yeah, I mentioned it previously, and that's certainly it all starts with knowing where the objects are. TRACS is the program that's been identified. We had identified that the Office of Space Commerce would be responsible for it, and if we don't have a means of tracking objects in space, the problem you identified is just going to accelerate. So I really do think that it's making sure that the program is funded, and then we can build from there. I mean, ultimately, we need to take solutions that we develop, because I think the United States should take a leadership position, but ultimately this is a global issue. But certainly if we have a system in place to be able to identify objects in space, it gives us the opportunity to provide that leadership.
Yeah, and that, coupled with good regulation and practice for being able to respond to conjunction potential, right, that is informed by the TRACS system, and then being able to have policies and practices to mitigate the further increase in the debris in the first place. There are some very key areas that are under consideration right now that will make a difference, right, in how that unfolds.
We're over time, so we'll stop the questions there. I want to say a huge thanks to our panelists. This was a wonderful discussion. I learned a lot. I hope you guys learned a lot as well. Again, I'm Amber McIntyre with AIA. If you want to learn more about what we do as a trade association, please come and see me. And also, Jim, thanks to you for pulling this together. Thank y'all.